lecture is called Differences in Music Across the Soviet Union Through the Trumpet, which is very long-winded. All I mean to say is I want to talk about music in the Soviet Union. So this piece that I just played, Fanfare for a New Theater, was written in 1964 by Igor Stravinsky, premiered April 19th for the New York State Theater. It's dedicated to Lincoln Kirstein and George Balanchine. George Balanchine was born Georgy Milutinovich Balachivazdia in St. Petersburg, Russia, but he fled the Soviet Union in 1924 and moved to Paris and became a ballet master in the Ballet Russe in Paris. And at this time, he met Stravinsky, and he eventually met Lincoln Kirstein, who's an American writer, artist, and communist. Both found a ballet tradition in America, so this became the New York City Ballet. The New York State Theater is a new home, and so this is the Fanfare for the New Theater, the State Theater. Interesting story. In 1962, Stravinsky had returned to the Soviet Union. It was the first time he was back since he left in 1914 when it was still Russia during World War I. They asked him to play a series of concerts in Leningrad and Moscow, and it was shortly after his 80th birthday. Many Soviet composers expressed the hope that he would celebrate his next birthday on Russian soil. They sent him birthday telegrams, and Khrushchev sent him a plea to come and visit, come back, native son. And he did. He came back in 1962. He did a lot of his most famous works, such as The Rite of Spring, wind arrangement of the Song of the Volga Boatman, his octet, his septet, The Soldier's Tale, many other pieces at 4 concerts. Of the visit, he had said, "No artist's name has been more abused in the Soviet Union than mine. But one cannot achieve the future we must achieve with the Russians by nursing a grudge." So, Tikhon Khrennikov sent him an invitation. He finally accepted that. Tikhon Khrennikov was the secretary of the Union of Soviet Composers. And later, when I talk about our next piece, it's the same guy who had condemned Stravinsky for formalism and bourgeoisie tendencies. So, earlier in 1922, 12-tone techniques were praised. People loved Stravinsky and they loved Schoenberg in the Soviet Union, and because of the Cultural Revolution in Russia. And so it was open to new freedoms, especially in the arts. And I'll talk about that in the last piece, which was written in 1922. But fanfare, it's odd. Fanfare is an old form, but this one does not sound like regular fanfare because it's a 12-tone piece. It's atonal. And it's completely in contrast to what was happening in the Soviet Union at the time. And I'll get more into this in a few minutes, but in the late 1940s, a wave of neo-romanticism had developed in the USSR, continuing the traditions of older Russian composers, specifically Pyotr Tchaikovsky, and Civil Age composers such as Rachmaninoff and Scriabin. But the odd thing is, Tchaikovsky was personal and very un-Russian music, and he was more about mimicking Western traditions, and he was highly favored by the Tsar. So it's a bit odd that people would pick up on this and say oh, this should be the model for Soviet music, because you would think it would be more like composers like Mussorgsky and Borodin, who wrote operas like Boris Godunov and Prince Igor, Knyaz Igor, which are based on Russian history, Russian literature. Boris Godunov comes from a play by Pushkin. So it's a bit odd, but they picked up on this. But a little more about Stravinsky. Valery Gergiev, current conductor of the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg, said Stravinsky was Russian to the core. And even after living in America 30 years, Stravinsky had said, "I speak many languages, but my tongue is Russian." And even after leaving the USSR, he refused to speak English for a while, which is kind of hard living in America. But, so in honor of Stravinsky's break with tradition, as well as Lincoln and George's endeavors in founding a ballet tradition in America, this piece deserves a high place among trumpet literature, and especially Russian trumpet music, even though it's completely unlike everything happening in the Soviet Union at the time it was written. But what was happening in the Soviet Union? That's kind of like our next piece. It's Concerto for Trumpet. So when Alexander Grigorievich Arutiunian wrote his Concerto for Trumpet in 1950, it was following on the wave of a large-scale musical reform in the Soviet Union. 2 years earlier, in 1948, there was a vast purge of musicologists. It's not as well known internationally as the purge that swept up composers such as Shostakovich and Khachaturian in 1936. But the critics and musicologists who had like praised Shostakovich and Arutiunian then were now being persecuted in 1948. These people were now on trial because of their servility towards the West and formalistic tendencies. It was almost like a settling of scores for the regime because the war in Europe had been won, and now they can concentrate on killing other people. But anyway, so formalism was officially defined, if you don't know, in the Soviet Union as the separation of content from form. And Soviets also wanted to make sure you know that it should not be confused with individualized original creativity, genuine innovations in terms of form, as well as content, which constitute an indispensable trait of valuable realist art. So the main concern of Soviets was that music should not be created artificially. It should, as a study of sounds and their use together, such as the 12-tone piece, which is, you construct like your row of all the notes so it like destabilizes the tonic and put them in different orders and like figure out melodies based on like this chart. It should come more from like tonal structures and like sitting down at a piano and like playing a piece. So in 1948, Andrei Zhdanov had appointed Tikhon Khronikov as secretary of the Union of Soviet Composers. He led this new purge, same guy by Stravinsky, for calling for more music along the path towards socialist realism, more in line with the mighty legacy of Russian music of the 19th century, like I mentioned before. No formalistic theories and non-standard approaches to music were tolerated. Here's what they wrote out as the goals of Soviet musicology. Rebuild musicology on the ideals of Marxism-Leninism, incorporating Soviet realist ideas, remove all cosmopolitan tendencies of bourgeoisie ideology, to create realistic music versus anti-realistic or anti-people, to reveal the interrelations of Russian and other fraternal people of the Soviet Union, and to emphasize the worldwide historical significance of Soviet music. So, enter Arutiunian. Alexander Arutiunian, he is a Soviet composer of Armenian descent, born in 1920. He attended the Conservatory in Yerevan, Armenia, where he received this Soviet education based on this credo. And it's interesting because he's from Armenia, and one of the points is to reveal the interrelations of Russian and other fraternal people. So his works combined a classical and romantic traditions like 19th century, but he added an improvisatory style, such as found in his native Armenia, which you'll hear in the beginning and slower sections in the end of the concerto. And so at the time, he became popular because his melodies seemed like very foreign and exotic to Russian ears. This concerto was his sixth major composition. It was originally written for Zolak Batassaryan, who was then principal of the Armenian National Orchestra, but Batassaryan died in World War II. And when the concerto was completed in 1950, it was premiered by Aikaz Meslian. But Timothy Dakshitzer, who I'll talk more about later, was the first Soviet trumpeter to record this concerto. And this recording became famous worldwide and promoted Arutiunian, Russian music, and Timothy Dakshitzer to the world at large. Even the cadenza at the end was written by Dakshitzer, which you'll hear. And okay, Arutiunian later went on to write many other concertos, many other works with the same Armenian style mixed with neo-romanticism and some classical music. But none reached the international recognition as Trumpet Concerto achieved. It is now considered a cornerstone of the trumpet repertoire. Arutiunian died in his hometown of Yerevan, Armenia, March 28, 2012. Pretty exciting. But I'm going to go get my trumpet. You can start this piece.